Does she really think someone like her belongs here? The words cut through the spring air like thorns sharp relentless outside her flower shop. Danielle, Miles 28, stood frozen just minutes ago. She had been arranging roses in the golden afternoon light, her warm brown skin glowing, her coiled curls swept back, her world calm and blooming. And now her husband was with another woman, Kira 23, an influencer wrapped in red silk and venom. Her brown skin, those old-fashioned flowers. Kira scoffed, and Marcus, he sneered. Silently, Danielle's heart was broken and trembling. But this was not the end of Danielle's story. This was the beginning. Will betrayal break her, or spark a rebirth, the likes of which the world has never seen? If you believe that dignity should never be extinguished and that justice always finds a way, then this story will stay with you. Subscribe, add your city in the comments, and stay tuned until the end, because what Danielle does next will leave you breathless. The late morning sun poured through the wide windows of Bloom and Balance, bathing the flower shop in a warm, honeyed glow. Danielle, Miles, stood behind the counter, her radiant complexion catching the light like polished amber. Her tight curls swept into a high bun that swayed slightly as she moved at 28. She was a vision of quiet strength. Her almond-shaped eyes, framed by long lashes, held a spark of dreams, unspoken, and her full lips curved into a soft smile. As she arranged a bouquet of pays and lavender, the air was thick with a sweet, earthy scent of blooms mingling with the faint hum of a jazz playlist drifting from a small speaker in the corner. Every stem she touched seemed to lean toward her as if drawn to the care in her fingertips. This shop, her sanctuary, was more than a business. It was a testament to her heart, built from years of saving, sketching, and daring to believe she could create something. Beautiful, Danielle's hands moved with practiced grace, trimming a roses thorn with a small pair of shears, her movements deliberate yet effortless. She wore a simple linen apron over a cream blouse and high-waisted jeans, the outfit practical but elegant, mirroring the balance she sought in life. The shop was alive with color, vibrant dollas in terracotta pots, delicate baby's breath spilling from wicker baskets and cascades of ivy trailing along the shelves. Customers often lingered longer than they meant to caught. In the spell of the space she'd crafted, where every corner whispered peace, a young couple browsed near the entrance, their laughter soft, and an elderly woman clutched a bundle of tulips, murmuring thanks as she left. Danielle's smile widened. This was her world, and it felt enough. 2 years ago, that world had expanded when Marcus Bray walked into it. He'd come to buy flowers for a client dinner, his salesman's charm as bold as his tailored blazer, with a flash of white teeth and a voice smooth as bourbon. He leaned against her counter, joking about needing something that says, "Trust me," without trying too hard. Danielle had laughed her guard, slipping and handed him a cluster of white orchids. These, she'd said, say confidence with class. He'd returned the next day and the day after, each visit stretching longer, his eyes lingering on her. More than the blooms, Marcus was a whirlwind, tall with a lean build, hazel eyes that crinkled when he grinned, and a knack for making promises that felt like poetry. He spoke of building a life together, of a house with a garden where she could grow her own flowers of children. Who'd inherit her smile? Danielle, fresh from college with a degree in international studies and a multilingual tongue, had always been cautious. But Marcus's fervor was a flame she couldn't resist. Their courtship was a blur of stolen moments. Late-night drives under starlit skies, his hand warm in hers, picnics by the river, where he'd tease her about her love for French poetry, quiet evenings in her tiny apartment, her head on his chest, as he spun visions of their future. "We'll be unstoppable, Danielle," he'd say, his voice alike. "With certainty, you with your brains, me with my hustle, will own this city." She believed him not because she needed his dreams, but because she wanted to share hers. Their wedding was small, a sun-drenched affair in a community garden, her white dress swaying as they danced to a violin's hum, jasmine woven into her hair. Friends toasted their love, and Danielle felt the world align, as if every choice had led to this moment now, as she tied a satin ribbon around a bouquet. The memory of that day tugged at her heart. Marriage hadn't been perfect. Marcus's job kept him on the road, his sales pitches pulling him to dinners and conferences that stretched into the night. He'd come home with stories of deals closed and clients charmed but lately. His stories were shorter, his eyes darting to his phone. When he thought she wasn't looking, Danielle noticed the shift, the way his laughter felt forced, the way his touch lingered less. She pushed the unease down, burying it beneath the rhythm of her days. He was stressed, she told herself. Sales was a grind. He'd promised forever, and Marcus Bray didn't break promises. The shop's bell chimed, snapping her from her thoughts. A regular Mrs. Green shuffled in, her silver hair catching the light. Danielle, dear. These lies are divine, she said, pointing to a display. Danielle crossed the room, her steps light, and began wrapping the flowers in tissue paper. They're fresh from the market, she replied, her voice warm, perfect for your daughter's visit. As they chatted, Danielle's gaze drifted to the window where the city pulsed, beyond a blur of cars, pedestrians, and spring's first green. She loved this corner of the world where her shop stood as a beacon of beauty. Amid the chaos, Marcus had called it her little empire. And though he'd said it with a grin, the words had rooted in her soul. She glanced at the clock. 11:47 a.m. Marcus had texted earlier, saying he'd swing by for lunch. The thought brought a flicker of warmth, but it was laced with something else, something she couldn't name. She shook it off, turning to a new order. A dozen sunflowers for a birthday. As she worked, her mind wandered to their early days, to the way Marcus had once surprised her with a single rose tucked behind her ear, whispering, "You're my forever bloom." The memory was vivid, but it felt distant, like a photograph fading at the edges outside the sun. Climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The jazz playlist looped to a familiar saxophone riff, and Danielle hummed softly, her hands steady, her heart hopeful. Whatever cracks had formed, she'd mend them. She was Danielle Miles, builder of dreams, weaver of beauty. Marcus was her partner, her love, her promise, and promises like flowers could bloom, again if tended with care. She tied the sunflowers with twine, her smile returning, unaware that beyond her shop's glass doors, the world was about to shift, and the man she trusted was already slipping away. The humid air clung to the glass panes of bloom and balance like a second skin, the afternoon sun casting lazy streaks across the polished wooden floor. Danielle, Miles 28, stood at her workbench, her warm brown skin glistening faintly with the day's warmth, her curls pinned high in a bun that bobbed as she snipped lavender stems. The shop was a haven of scent and color: roses, blushing pink lies unfurling in white glory, and ivy trailing like whispered secrets. A soft jazz tune curled through the air, its saxophone notes weaving around the gentle clink of her shears. Danielle's hands, steady and sure, arranged blooms with a reverence that felt sacred, each petal a piece of her heart. She wore a sleeveless linen dress, its sage green hue complementing her glow, and a thin gold chain at her neck caught the light as she moved the world outside. Her shop felt distant, but within these walls she was queen. She glanced at the eye clock. 2:13 p.m. Marcus had promised lunch, but the hour had come and gone. A faint unease prickled her spine, one she'd grown accustomed to, ignoring his sales trips, his late nights, the way his hazel eyes flitted to his phone during dinner. It was just work, she told herself. Marcus Bray, her husband of 2 years, was a man of big promises, and she'd staked her heart on them. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on a bouquet for a wedding order. Creamy pies and eucalyptus tied with ivory ribbon. The bell above the door would chime soon, she thought, and he'd breeze in with that grin, apologizing with a kiss. The image steadied her like a root anchoring a flower in a storm. Then the bell did chime, sharp and sudden, slicing through the jazz. Danielle looked up, her lips parting in anticipation, but the sight beyond the glass froze her blood. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, his lean frame unmistakable in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His arm was draped around a woman, blonde, young, her figure sculpted like a magazine cover. She wore a tight red dress that screamed for attention, her hair cascading in waves that caught the sun. They laughed, heads close, her hand resting on his chest, with a familiarity that twisted Danielle's stomach. The woman's voice, high and cutting, carried through the open door. "Look at her in there, Marcus, with her brown skin and those old lady flowers. I'm younger, hotter, admit it." Danielle's shears trembled, the lavender stems snapping in her grip. Marcus didn't flinch. He smirked, pulling the woman closer, his silence louder than any confession. Danielle's breath caught a shard of glass in her throat. The shop, her sanctuary, seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as the world tilted. She set the shears down, her hands shaking, and closer to the counter, needing something solid to anchor her. The woman Kira she'd later learned tossed her hair, her laugh a blade. "She's probably crying over her daisies right now," Kira said loud enough to ensure Danielle heard. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the shop, meeting Danielle's for a fleeting second. There was no shame, no apology, just a glint of defiance before he turned away, guiding Kira down the street. Their laughter fading into the city's hum, the jazz played on oblivious, but Danielle's world had cracked open. She stood rooted, her pulse pounding in her ears, the bouquet forgotten. A customer browsed near the lies, unaware of the storm brewing behind the counter. Danielle's mind raced, every late night, every evasive answer, every half-hearted touch now glaringly clear. She'd built her life around a man who just carved her heart out with a smirk. Her fingers brushed the gold chain at her neck, a wedding gift from him, and bile rose in her throat. She wanted to scream, to chase them down, to demand answers, but she didn't. She was Danielle Miles, and she'd never let them see her break that night. The shop closed, its lights dimmed. Danielle sat across from Marcus in their apartment, the air heavy with unspoken truths. He'd come home late, his cologne tinged with a floral perfume that wasn't hers. She'd waited, her sage dress swapped for a simple tee and jeans, her curls loose, framing a face carved with resolve. "Who is she?" Danielle asked, her voice low, steady, though her chest ached. Marcus leaned back, his hazel eyes narrowing, as if weighing how much to admit. "Her name's Kira," he said finally, his tone casual, like he was discussing the weather. "She's exciting, younger. I need that spark. Danielle, you're too comfortable, too predictable." The words landed like blows, each one stripping away the promises he'd made. Danielle's gaze held his, searching for the man who'd vowed forever in a garden. "He wasn't there if she's what you want," she said, her voice a quiet blade. "Then go." Marcus blinked, surprised by her calm. But he didn't hesitate. He grabbed a duffel bag, tossing in shirts and shoes with a careless efficiency that stung more than his words. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing in the hollow space he left. Danielle sat alone. The apartment, silent, save for the distant hum of the city. Her hands rested on the table, the gold chain now discarded beside her. The pain was raw, a living thing clawing at her chest, but beneath it something else stirred: anger, resolve, a flicker of defiance. She wouldn't crumble. Not for Marcus, not for Kira, not for the betrayal that had shattered her world. The flowers in her shop would wilt before she did. As the clock ticked past midnight, Danielle rose, her silhouette framed against the window's city glow. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing: she'd survive this, and she'd do it on her terms. The air in Danielle Miles' apartment was thick with the silence of a life unmet at 28. She sat on the edge of her bed, the sage-green dress from that fateful day, replaced by a loose cotton tee and sweatpants. Her tight curls spilling free, framing a face etched with quiet resolve. The room, once warmed by shared laughter with Marcus, now felt like a museum of promises, broken, his half-empty closet a gaping wound. The gold chain he'd given her, abandoned on the dresser like a relic. The city hummed beyond her window, its distant lights flickering like stars too far to touch. It had been 5 days since Marcus walked out, his smirk and Kira's cruel words still echoing in her mind, each memory a thorn in her chest. Yet beneath the ache, something stirred, a flicker of defiance, a refusal to let betrayal define her. Danielle's hands trembled as she clutched a small white stick, its 2 pink lines stark against the dim glow of her bedside lamp. Pregnant, 2 weeks. The word pulsed in her mind, a secret seed planted in the wreckage of her marriage. She'd suspected it for days, missed cycles of faint nausea she'd blamed on stress. But the truth now stared back. Undeniable joy and fear collided, a storm of what-ifs swirling in her gut. This child, hers and Marcus's, was a gift she hadn't expected, but the thought of raising it in a place steeped in his betrayal felt like chaining. Her future, too, a ghost bloom in balance. Her beloved flower shop was no longer a sanctuary, its blooms now whispered of Kira's taunts, of Marcus's silence. She couldn't stay. The decision came like a lightning strike, sharp and illuminating. Danielle rose, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and crossed to the window, The city sprawled below, indifferent. But in its vastness, she saw possibility. She'd leave, start fresh somewhere new, where the air didn't carry the weight of yesterday. Her international studies degree, her fluency in Spanish and French, her relentless spirit. They were tools she'd long undervalued, buried beneath the role of wife of shopkeeper. Now they gleamed like keys to a door she'd yet to open. But first, she had to let go the next morning. She called a realtor, her voice steady as she listed Bloom and Balance for sale. It's time, she said the words, a vow to herself. By week's end, the shop was sold, its keys handed over with a pang. She swallowed like bitter medicine. She packed her life into 2 suitcases. Clothes, books, a single pressed rose from her wedding day, and boarded a train to a coastal city 3 hours away. Its name, a promise of renewal, Havenport, greeted her with salt-kissed breezes and streets lined with cobbled charm. Danielle rented a small apartment above a bakery, its scent of fresh bread a quiet comfort. The space was modest, a single bedroom, a kitchen with a chipped blue sink, but it was hers untainted by Marcus's shadow. She stood on the narrow balcony, her curls catching the wind, and felt the first stirrings of freedom. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, a silent pact with the life growing within. Will be okay. She whispered, her voice soft, but sure. The child, her Kai, deserved a mother who thrived, not one who mourned. Danielle's days took on a new rhythm. Mornings began with yoga, her body stretching into poses that grounded her racing mind. She found a studio near the pier, its windows open to the sea, where a soft-spoken instructor guided her through sun salutations. Each breath, each stretch, unraveled the knots of pain Marcus had left. Inhale strength. Exhale doubt, the instructor said, and Danielle clung to the mantra. Her body growing stronger, her spirit lighter. Meditation followed. Stolen moments on her balcony, where she sat cross-legged, eyes closed, letting the sound of waves wash over her. The loneliness still crept in, especially at night when the apartment silence pressed too close, but she faced it, letting the ache pass. Like clouds across a steady sky, her mind, always sharp, turned to the future. Havenport was a hub for students, its university drawing dreamers from across the globe. Danielle saw an opportunity. Her international studies degree had taught her systems market strategy, her languages opened doors to the world. She began sketching a business plan, her pen moving with the same care she'd once given to Bouquet's global horizons. She called it a study abroad consulting firm to guide students toward international opportunities. She worked late into the night, her laptop glowing, her coffee cooling, as she built a website, contacted universities, and drafted proposals. Her multilingual charm, honed in college, became her superpower. Disarming clients with ease, a local cafe owner impressed by her pitch became her first partner, offering space for workshops. Slowly, global horizons took root, its tendrils reaching further than she dared hope. Danielle stood in her apartment one evening, 6 weeks after arriving. Her reflection caught in a small mirror, her warm brown skin glowed, her curls framed a face. No longer shadowed by grief, the pregnancy was still a secret, a quiet strength she carried alone. She wore a loose blouse, its fabric soft against her skin, and her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the faint curve of possibility. Havenport was her canvas now, and she was painting a life unbound by Marcus's betrayal. The pain of his departure lingered, a bruise that ached when pressed, but it no longer ruled her. She was Danielle Miles, mother, dreamer, builder of empires. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting amber streaks across the sea, she closed her eyes, breathing deeply. A seed had been planted, not just within her body but in her soul, and it was beginning to bloom. The salt-tinged breeze of Havenport swept through Danielle Miles' small apartment, stirring the gauzy curtains that framed her balcony. At 28, she stood in the soft dawn light, her warm brown skin glowing with a quiet radiance, her tight curls pulled into a loose ponytail that danced in the wind. 7 months had passed since she'd left behind Bloom and Balance and the shards of her marriage. To Marcus Bray, her new home, perched above a bakery that perfumed the air with sourdough and cinnamon, was a canvas of possibilities, simple, with a creaky wooden floor and a single potted fern. But hers alone. Danielle's hand rested on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly, a tender promise beneath her flowing cotton dress. The child within her, Kai, was a heartbeat that anchored her, a root taking hold in soil. She was still learning to trust. Havenport had welcomed her like an old friend, its cobbled streets and seaside charm, a balm to her wounded spirit. But Danielle was no longer content to merely heal. She was building her international studies degree, once a quiet credential now burned bright as she poured her intellect into global horizons. Her study abroad consulting firm. The idea born in the sleepless nights of her early days in Havenport had grown into something tangible. Her laptop perched on a thrift store desk, hummed with proposals, client emails, and a sleek website she designed herself. Her fluency in Spanish and French opened doors. Her voice, warm assured, charming university, deans, and anxious students alike. She'd secured her first contract with Havenport University, a program to send students to Barcelona, and the victory felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You're a natural," the dean had said. Shaking her hand, Danielle smiled, but inside she was a storm of pride and hunger, determined to make her mark. Her days were a delicate dance of ambition and introspection. Mornings began at the yoga studio by the pier, where the crash of waves mingled with her steady breaths. Danielle moved through warrior poses, her body strong despite the weight of pregnancy, her deep brown eyes fixed on the horizon. The instructor's voice, soft as seafoam, guided her route down. "Rise up, Danielle." Did both her muscles trembling, with effort, her mind clearing with each exhale. Yoga was more than exercise. It was a ritual, a way to weave strength into the fabric of her being. Meditation followed, often on her balcony, where she sat cross-legged, the scent of salt and bread grounding her. She'd close her eyes, letting the ache of Marcus's betrayal, his smirk, Kira's venom drift away like driftwood on the tide. The pain lingered, a shadow that crept in during quiet moments, but it no longer held her hostage. Global Horizons grew with a momentum that surprised even Danielle. She hosted workshops at a local cafe, its exposed brick walls and steaming espressos a backdrop to her presentations. Students crowded the tables, their faces alight. As she spoke of Paris, Madrid, Tokyo worlds, they could claim with the right guidance, her multilingual charm disarmed them, her stories of navigating new cultures as a college student sparking their dreams. Parents nodded, impressed by her poise. Professors sent referrals. A second contract followed. Then a third. Each won a brick in the foundation she hired an assistant, a bright-eyed graduate named Laya, whose energy matched her. "No, you're building something special," Laya said one evening, sorting files. Danielle's smile was soft but fierce. "We're just getting started." The nights were harder alone in her apartment. The silence sometimes pressed too close, whispering doubts. Would Global Horizons last? Could she be the mother Kai deserved? She'd trace the curve of her belly, feeling his kicks, and the fears would soften. She'd hum French lullabies, her voice a thread connecting her to the child she hadn't yet met. The pressed rose from her wedding, tucked in a journal, was a relic. She rarely touched its petals, brittle with memory. Marcus's face, his hazel eyes, his easy grin flashed in her mind, unbidden, but she'd learned to let it pass like a wave retreating from shore. The day Kai was born, Havenport was cloaked in a gentle spring rain. Danielle's labor was fierce, a tempest of pain and power, but she faced it with the same resolve that had carried her from betrayal to rebirth. In a hospital room scented with antiseptic and hope, she held her son. His tiny face, a mirror of her own warm brown skin, a tuft of curls, eyes that seemed to hold the sea. Kai, she whispered. The name of Val. He was her root, her reason, her proof that beauty could grow from broken ground. The nurses smiled, but Danielle barely noticed, lost in the weight of him, the warmth of him, the miracle of him. She returned to her apartment a mother, her world irrevocably changed. Global Horizons waited, its files and emails, a quiet hum in the background, but Kai was her center. Now she'd work with him, nestled in a sling against her chest. His soft breath sinking, with her keystrokes. Yoga resumed slower, now her body adapting to its new shape. Meditation became a shared ritual, Kai gurgling on a blanket as she breathed in the dawn. Havenport streets embraced her. Anew she'd pushed Kai's stroller through the market, her curls bouncing her smile drawing nods from strangers who saw not a woman scorned, but one who'd claimed her place. Danielle stood on her balcony one evening, Kai asleep in her arms, the sea a silver shimmer under the moon, her radiant complexion, her cotton dress catching the breeze. Global Horizons was thriving her contracts, multiplying her name whispered in academic circles. The pain of Marcus's betrayal was a distant echo, no longer a chain, but a scar proof of battles won. She was Danielle Miles, mother, visionary architect of her own destiny. As the waves sang below, she felt her roots deepen, not in the past, but in the life she was building, one breath, one dream, one love at a time. The city pulsed with a restless energy, its neon lights slicing through the dusk as Marcus Bray leaned against the balcony railing of his sleek condo. At 32. He cut a sharp figure, lean with hazel eyes that once charmed clients, and a tailored blazer that screamed success. But the grin that had won Danielle Miles's heart 2 years ago now felt brittle. A mask worn, thin inside the condo gleamed with modern excess gray, marble counters, a rooftop, hot tub, and Kira's curated chaos of ring lights and makeup palettes. The air hummed with her voice, bright and relentless, as she filmed another Instagram reel. Her blonde hair a cascade of calculated perfection. Marcus sipped his bourbon, the burn in his throat a fleeting distraction from the hollow ache. He'd traded Danielle's quiet warmth for Kira's wildfire, and, in his mind, he'd one left behind, a woman who'd surely crumble without him. Marcus's days were a blur of sales pitches and Kira's world. His job peddling software to corporate suits paid for the condo and her endless brand deals, but it left him drained. His charm stretched thin. Kira, 24, was a whirlwind, her red dresses, her 50,000 followers, her champagne brunches, a stark contrast to Danielle's flower shop and jazz playlists. He'd convinced himself this was what he wanted: youth, excitement, a life that sparkled for the world to see. Danielle, he imagined, was still in that old apartment, clutching wine, glasses, and old photos. Her warm brown eyes dimmed by his absence. She'd loved him too much to move on. He thought her life frozen in the moment. He'd walked out with a smirk, Kira's arm in his. The idea was a quiet comfort, a tether to his choice. But the city had other plans. One crisp morning, Marcus maneuvered his silver sedan through downtown, the radio droning a sales podcast. He barely heard traffic slowed, and his gaze drifted to a cherry-red convertible gleaming under the sun, its curves. As bold as a siren's call behind the wheel was Danielle Miles, her tight curls bouncing free, a silk scarf fluttering like a banner of freedom. Her warm brown skin glowed, her smile radiant, her linen blouse catching the breeze. She was no ghost of the woman he'd left. She was alive, vibrant, a queen commanding the road. Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his pulse a sudden hammer in his chest. The light changed and she was gone, her convertible vanishing around a corner, but the image seared into him. A crack in the illusion he'd built, he told himself. It was nothing, a coincidence, a trick of memory. Danielle couldn't be that woman, not after he'd left her for Kira's dazzle. But the doubt took root. A weed in his carefully tended narrative at home. Kira's world felt sharper, less enchanting. Her voice, once a melody, now grated as she ranted about algorithm changes. Her phone, a constant third presence. Marcus found himself tuning out, his eyes glazing over as she unboxed par packages, serums, lipsticks, things that mattered to her followers but left him cold. He'd catch himself staring at his phone, thumb hovering over Danielle's name in his contacts, though he never called. Instead, he searched her LinkedIn, a secret he guarded like a vice. Global horizons. Her study abroad, firm stared back, professional. Headshot, confident bio, a string of endorsements. She wasn't mourning, she was thriving. The cracks widened. Kira noticed his silences, his distracted glances one night sprawled on their leather couch in an oversized hoodie. She snapped, her blue eyes flashing. You're obsessed with her, Marcus. Her voice cut through the condo's sterile hum. Her phone tossed aside, mid-reel. I saw you checking her LinkedIn. Pathetic. Marcus flinched, his bourbon glass sweating in his hand. You're imagining things, he said too quickly, his grin forced. But Kira's gaze was a scalpel slicing through his deflection. You think I don't see you following her sister's Instagram? All those yoga retreats, those client dinners. She's not crying over you, Marcus, get over it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth too raw to face. Kira huffed, retreating to her ring light, but her words lingered, a mirror he couldn't unsee. Marcus lay awake that night, the condo's sleek walls closing in, Kira's soft snores, a faint rhythm beside him. His mind churned, replaying Danielle's convertible, her glow, the life she'd built without him. He'd pictured her broken, but the woman in that car was unbroken, untouchable. The bourbon's warmth couldn't dull the ache, not regret, not yet, but annoying unease that he'd miscalculated. He'd traded depth for dazzle, substance for surface, and now the surface was cracking. Kira's world, all filters and followers, felt hollow next to the memory of Danielle's quiet strength, her hands arranging flowers with a care he'd never matched. Morning came gray and heavy. The city's pulse, a dull throb. Marcus stood at the balcony, coffee cooling in his hand, the hot tub silent behind him. Kira was already filming, her laugh a performance for strangers. He stared at the skyline, searching for the woman. He'd left the one he'd assumed would, but Danielle Miles wasn't fading. She was rising, and the illusion of his victory was crumbling. The city stretched before him, vast and indifferent, and for the first time, Marcus felt small. A man who'd gambled on a dream that glittered but didn't last, somewhere out there. Danielle was rewriting her story, and he was no longer a part of it. But the city's pulse, through walls of Marcus Bray's condo, its neon glow, casting jagged shadows across the sleek marble floors. At 32, Marcus stood at the edge of his world. A bourbon glass sweating in his hand, his hazel eyes fixed on the skyline, but seeing nothing. The condo, once a trophy of his new life, with Kira, now felt like a stage set, polished hollow, its gray walls echoing with the relentless chatter of her Instagram live. Kira, 24, perched on a velvet stool, her blonde hair a halo under the ring light, her voice a practiced lilt as she unboxed a skincare haul for her followers. Marcus's tailored blazer hung loose on his frame, his grin long replaced by a tightness around his mouth. The memory of Danielle Miles in her cherry-red convertible, her warm brown skin glowing, her smile, a blade of confidence, haunted him. A crack in the facade of his carefully crafted victory. Weeks had passed since that morning, but the image of Danielle, vibrant and untouchable, clung to him like damp air. Marcus had built his life on the illusion that she'd crumbled without him, that her flower shop and quiet dreams couldn't survive his absence. Yet there she was, commanding the city's streets, her global horizons, blooming on LinkedIn with contracts and accolades. He'd check her profile in secret, his thumb scrolling through her updates, workshops in Havenport, a feature in a local paper, each one a pinprick to his pride. Danielle wasn't mourning, she was soaring, and the truth gnawed at him, a hunger he couldn't sate. His sales pitches faltered, his charm dulled his mind. Drifting mid-meeting to the woman he'd left behind, Kira felt the shift. Her world of filters and followers thrived, but Marcus's silences grew louder, his gaze distant as she rambled about brand deals. Their condo, once a playground of late-night parties and champagne toasts, now crackled with tension one evening as fairy lights twinkled on the rooftop. Kira confronted him, her red dress clinging to her curves, her blue eyes sharp. "You're not here, Marcus," she snapped, tossing her phone onto the glass table with a clatter. "You're moping over her. I saw you on her sister's Instagram again. Yoga retreats, client dinners. What's your deal?" Marcus's jaw tightened, his bourbon glass a cold anchor. "You're paranoid," he said, his voice low, but the lie tasted sour. Kira's laugh was brittle, a shard of glass. "Paranoid? You're stalking your ex while I'm building an empire. Get it together, or we're done." She stormed to her ring light, but her words lingered, a mirror to his unraveling. The cracks spread, their arguments flared over trivial things, her spending his late nights at the office, the way he'd zone out during her live streams. Marcus's job, once a ladder to success, felt like a treadmill. Each sale, a hollow win. Kira's youth, once intoxicating, now exhausted him. Her endless need for validation, her phone a constant hum between them. He'd lie awake at night, her soft snores a faint rhythm, his mind replaying Danielle's convertible, her scarf fluttering like a flag of freedom. He'd traded depth for dazzle, and the dazzle was fading, its shine revealing a core of nothing. One overcast evening, Marcus walked through the city's bustling core, his briefcase heavy, his tie loosened. The air was thick with the scent of street food and exhaust, the crowd a blur of purpose. He no longer felt. He paused at a crosswalk, the chatter of passers-by washing over him, when a voice cut through the noise. Two women, arms linked, stood near a cafe, their conversation bright. "Danielle's killing it," one said, her tone warm with admiration. Her firm, "Sending kids to Paris now, and that new guy she's with, total dreamboat tech, entrepreneur, crazy successful." The other laughed. They're perfect together. She's glowing like next level. Marcus froze his breath, catching the words a fist to his gut. Danielle in love with someone better. His mind reeled, the city tilting around him. He stepped closer, pretending to check his phone, his ears straining there, keeping it low-key. The first woman continued, but you can tell it's serious. He's speaking at some global summit. Soon Danielle's helping with his outreach. Marcus's throat tightened, his fingers gripping his briefcase until his knuckles paled. The women moved on, their voices fading. But the revelation stayed a weight he couldn't shake. Danielle wasn't just thriving, she'd found someone who matched her fire. Someone who saw the depth he'd dismissed, his illusion that she'd forever pin for him shattered like glass underfoot. Marcus walked on the city's hum, a dull roar in his ears. He passed a florist, its window bursting with roses and lilies, and the sight twisted something in his chest. Danielle's flower shop, her hands arranging blooms with care, flashed in his mind. A life he'd deemed too small, too quiet. Now she was building an empire, loving a man who wasn't him. But behind her glow, Marcus knew there had once been shadows, quiet ones. Early in their marriage, Danielle had suffered a bout of anxiety so severe she'd gone silent for days, hiding behind her shop's counter, whispering reassurances to herself between customers. She never let the world see, only him. And he, too busy chasing leads and numbers, had brushed it off. Now, seeing her rise from that to where she stood today, it made the blade twist deeper. The thought was a blade, not jealousy, but something deeper. A dawning realization that he'd misjudged her, underestimated her, discarded a woman whose strength he'd never truly seen. He reached the condo, its lights stark against the gray sky. Kira was filming her, laugh a performance for strangers. Her red dress, a beacon in the sterile space. Marcus stood in the doorway unnoticed, his briefcase slipping to the floor, the facade of his new life, Kira's glamour, his sales victories. The condo's shine was cracking, revealing a truth he couldn't ignore. Danielle Miles was rewriting her story, and he was a footnote. A man who'd gambled on a dream that glittered but didn't hold. As Kira's voice echoed, Marcus felt the ground shift, the city's pulse no longer his. Somewhere Danielle was rising and he was falling, caught in the shadow of a choice he couldn't undo. The evening air shimmered with the promise of celebration. A soft breeze weaving through the rose-covered trellises that framed Havenport's annual charity gala. String lights twinkled like captured stars, casting a golden glow over white-clad tables and the gentle clink of champagne. Flutes. Marcus Bray, 32, stepped through the archway, his tailored blazer crisp, but his hazel eyes shadowed a man teetering on the edge of his own unraveling beside him. Kira, 24, glowed in a coral dress that hugged her curves, her blonde hair cascading in waves, her phone already poised for a selfie. With the floral backdrop, the gala buzzed with laughter and jazz, a world of elegance that should have felt like home to Marcus's salesman charm. But his mind was elsewhere, haunted by the overheard whisper of Danielle Miles' new love, a tech entrepreneur who'd claimed the woman he'd discarded. Marcus scanned the crowd, nodding absently to a colleague's greeting, his bourbon glass a cold anchor in his hand. Kira chattered about her latest brand deal, her voice a bright hum, but he barely heard her. The memory of Danielle in her cherry-red convertible, her warm brown skin radiant, had shaken his illusion that she'd crumbled without him, the gossip he'd caught days ago. Her firm, thriving, her new man, a dreamboat, had deepened, the crack, leaving him raw, unsteady. He sipped his drink, the burn sharp, and told himself he was fine. This was his life now, Kira's glamour, his sales wins, a condo that gleamed, but the facade was fracturing, and the gala's glow only sharpened the truth. Then he saw her across the garden near. A hydrangea bush bursting with violet blooms stood Danielle Miles, 28, a vision that stole his breath. Her sapphire dress draped her curves like liquid night, its fabric catching the light with every graceful move. Her tight curls were swept into an elegant, updo tendrils, framing her glowing brown skin. Gold earrings glinted, subtle but regal, and her smile, warm, unforced, lit the space around her. She laughed, her posture relaxed, her presence a quiet command that turned heads. But it wasn't just Danielle who held Marcus's gaze. Beside her stood a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his rich brown skin gleaming. Under the string lights, his navy blazer open-collared exuded effortless confidence. his hand resting lightly on Danielle's back with a familiarity that twisted Marcus's gut. Marcus froze his bourbon glass, tilting slightly, the world narrowing to the couple before him. Kira, oblivious, snapped another photo, but Marcus's eyes were locked on Danielle. Her ease a stark contrast to the woman he'd imagined, broken, pining, lost. She turned her gaze, catching his, and for a heartbeat. Their eyes held, her smile didn't waver, but it was polite, distant, a wall he couldn't breach. She approached, her steps measured the man at her side, matching her stride. Marcus, Kira, hi. Danielle said, her voice smooth as silk, no trace of the pain he'd caused. This is Emery, my partner. Emery extended a hand, his grip firm, his dark eyes steady pleasure. He said, his tone warm but unshakable, a man who needed no validation. Marcus shook Emery's hand, his own clammy, his salesman's grin faltering. Eric, he muttered, then corrected himself. Marcus. Kira, sensing the shift, lowered her phone. Her smile, tight, Danielle's gaze was clear, her poise, a quiet rebuke to the chaos he'd left her in. Emery's speaking at a global education summit next month, she said, her hand brushing Emery's arm, pride in her voice. His edtech startups transforming schools in underserved areas. I'm helping with their community outreach. It's been exciting. Emery nodded, his smile soft but assured. Danielle's vision is the heart of it, he said, his hand settling on her back again, a gesture that spoke of roots of trust. The words hit Marcus like a tide, each one eroding his fragile pride, his sales job, his condo, his life with Kira. They paled against Emery's purpose, Danielle's glow. He forced a chuckle, too loud, too sharp, sounds impressive. He said, his voice hollow. Kira jumped in, her tone overly bright. Oh, Danielle, I saw your latest reel, super cute. Danielle's smile was kind, but her eyes held a subtle edge. Thanks, Kira, keep at it, you're consistent. The compliment laced with quiet steel left Kira fumbling, her cheeks flushing. Danielle and Emery excused themselves, their steps synchronized as they rejoined the gala's hum, leaving Marcus rooted to the spot. His bourbon trembled in his hand, the jazz trio's notes a distant pulse. Emery's accomplishments, a summit speaker, a startup founder, dwarfed his own middling career. Danielle's pride, her ease, her radiance. They were a mirror to the life he'd thrown away. He'd left her for Kira's dazzle, but Kira's world of filters and followers felt flimsy. Now a house of cards next to Danielle's empire of purpose. He glanced at Kira, her phone back in hand, her laugh a performance for strangers. She hadn't noticed his stillness, his unraveling. The gala sparkled on its laughter and clinking glasses, a cruel contrast to the storm in Marcus's chest. He'd pictured Danielle as a shadow of herself, but she was a flame burning brighter without him. Emery's hand on her back, their shared glance. They were a unit, a love he'd never offered her. His throat tightened, not with jealousy, but with a dawning grief for the man he might have been. The life he might have built with a woman whose depth he'd never seen. As Danielle's sapphire dress vanished into the crowd, Marcus stood alone. The gala's glow dimming his world, tilting toward a truth he couldn't outrun. The Havenport Gala shimmered under a canopy of stars, its string lights weaving a golden web over the rose-trellised garden. The air carried the scent of grilled vegetables and lavender, the jazz trio's mellow notes mingling. With the soft clink of champagne flutes, Marcus Bray, 32, stood near, a trimmed hedge, his bourbon glass forgotten in his hand, its amber liquid catching the light like a fading ember. His tailored blazer hung loose, his hazel eyes shadowed with a storm that had been building since he saw Danielle Miles, radiant, untouchable, on the arm of Emery, her new partner, the sight of her sapphire dress, her warm brown skin glowing, her smile, a quiet command, had cracked the illusion. He'd clung to that, she'd crumbled without him. Now as laughter rippled through the crowd, Marcus felt the ground beneath him shift, his world teetering on the edge of a truth. He wasn't ready to face moments earlier. Danielle and Emery had walked away, their steps synchronized, her hand resting lightly on his arm, their ease, their shared purpose. Her work with his edtech startup, his global summit speech had left Marcus reeling. His salesman's charm no match for the life they'd built. Kira, 24, stood a few feet away, her coral dress a bright splash as she snapped selfies, oblivious to the fault lines cracking through Marcus's facade. He'd left Danielle for Kira's dazzle, her youth, her 50,000 followers, but the gala's glow only sharpened the contrast. Kira's world was a performance, while Danielle's was a legacy. His chest tightened, a dull ache spreading as he replayed Danielle's words, her pride in Emery, the way she'd looked at him, with a love he'd never earned. The crowd shifted, and Marcus drifted toward a buffet table, its platters of canapés untouched by his trembling hand. Two guests, their voices low but clear, chatted nearby, their words slicing through the jazz like a blade, crazy about Danielle Wright. One said, a woman, with silver earrings glinting. She had a son right after her split. Kai. I think she's a rock star running that firm, raising him all while glowing like that. The other, a man in a linen suit, nodded. Yeah, didn't tell her ex. I guess she's unstoppable, and that. Emery guy perfect for her. Marcus's breath caught his bourbon glass slipping slightly, the liquid sloshing. Kai, a son, his son. The revelation crashed over him. A tidal wave that drowned the gala's hum. He stepped back, his shoulder brushing the hedge, the leaves rustling like whispers of his failure. Danielle had carried their child alone, birthed him in the shadow of his betrayal, and never told him she'd faced the pain of his departure. Kira's venom, his smirk, and built an empire while nurturing a life he'd never known. His mind spiraled, piecing together the timeline. The 2 weeks pregnant when he left the flower shop, sold her move to Havenport. She'd done it all without him. Not out of spite, but because he'd proven himself unworthy. The weight of it pressed against his ribs. A grief not just for what he'd lost, but for what he'd never deserved. Marcus's gaze found Danielle across the garden, seated now, her sapphire dress catching the candlelight. Emery sat beside her, his arm resting behind her chair, their laughter a shared secret. They were a unit, a family, a love that didn't need to shout to be seen. Kai wasn't there, likely with a sitter, but his existence changed everything. Marcus's son with Danielle's. Warm brown skin, her curls, her strength was growing up in a world he'd walked away from. The thought was a knife twisting deeper as he watched Danielle's head tilt back, her laugh bright, unburdened. She wasn't the woman he'd left. She was more a force he'd underestimated, a queen. He'd failed to crown. Kira's voice cut through shrill and sharp. Marcus. What's wrong? She rushed over her phone, lowered her blue eyes, narrowing. You're pale. Are you dizzy? He didn't answer, his stare fixed on Danielle, her joy, a mirror to his unraveling. Kira followed his gaze, her expression hardening. Is this about her? She hissed, her coral dress rustling as she stepped closer. Seriously, Marcus at a gala. He blinked, her words a distant echo, his mind drowning in the truth of Kai, of Danielle's rise, of the life he discarded for a fleeting thrill. Kira's hand brushed his arm, but he barely felt it, her presence a shadow next to the woman he'd lost. The jazz slowed, the gala's energy mellowing as candles flickered on tables. Marcus slumped against the buffet table, the cutlery rattling, drawing a few startled glances. His knees buckled, but he caught himself, his bourbon glass clattering to the ground, the amber liquid seeping into the grass. Kira fussed, adjusting his collar, her voice a mix of concern and irritation. But he was elsewhere, trapped in the memory of Danielle's flower shop, her hands arranging blooms, her dreams of impact. He dismissed as small. She'd spoken of consulting, of global outreach, and he'd smiled, nodded, never believing now she was living it with a son he'd never known, a man who saw her worth, a future he'd never imagined. Marcus's throat burned, his eyes unfocused, the gala's glow blurring into a haze. Danielle hadn't just survived, she'd transcended, her roots deeper, her branches higher, while he stood in the ruins of a choice that glittered but didn't last. Kira's voice faded, her touch irrelevant, the weight of truth. Kai. Danielle Emery crushed him, not with regret, but with the clarity of what could have been if he'd only seen her valued, her stayed as the stars burned above. Marcus felt the world tilt, his heart a hollow drum beating for a life he'd lost forever. The city's heartbeat thrummed through the glass walls of Marcus Bray's condo, its neon veins pulsing in the dark. But inside, the air was still heavy with the weight of truths too sharp to ignore. Marcus, 32, slumped in a leather armchair, his tailored blazer discarded on the floor, his hazel eyes staring blankly at the skyline. The condo, once a gleaming trophy of his life, with Kira, felt like a mausoleum, its gray marble and sleek lines mocking his unraveling. Somewhere down the hall, Kira's voice echoed, bright and relentless as she filmed a late-night reel, her laughter a performance for strangers. Marcus's bourbon glass sat empty on the coffee table, its amber residue a faint ghost of the night's failed escape. The gala's revelations, Danielle Miles' radiance, her son, Kai, their son and her love with Emery had shattered. The illusion he'd clung to, leaving him adrift in the wreckage of his choices. Hours. Earlier at the Havenport Gala, Marcus had watched Danielle 29 glow in her sapphire dress, her warm brown skin catching the candlelight. Her smile a quiet triumph. Emery's steady presence, his hand on her back, had been a mirror to Marcus's failure. A man who saw her worth where he'd seen only limits. The overheard truth about Kai, their son, born after Marcus's betrayal, had been a blade cutting through the lie that Danielle had crumbled without him. She'd carried their child alone, sold her flower shop, built global horizons, and found a love that matched her depth, all. While he chased Kira's fleeting dazzle, the weight of it pressed against his chest, a grief not just for what he'd lost, but for the man he'd failed to be. Marcus's fingers traced the armrest, his mind spiraling through memories. He'd buried Danielle petal and piece, her hands arranging roses with care, her voice soft as she spoke of consulting, of global impact. He'd smiled, nodded, dismissing her dreams as quaint, too small for his ambition. He'd traded her quiet strength for Kira's spotlight, her substance for a mirage that flickered and faded. Now Kira's world, her ring lights, her 50,000 followers, her red dresses, felt hollow, a stage he no longer belonged on. He saw her clearly now, her laughter a mask, her need for validation a chain he'd mistaken for freedom, and Danielle, she was a queen. Her empire built on resilience, her son, a legacy he'd never touch. The condo's silence was broken by Kira's footsteps. Her phone glowing as she entered, her coral dress, swapped for a silk robe. "You're still up?" she asked, her tone sharp, her blue eyes narrowing. "You've been weird since the gala." "It's her, isn't it?" Marcus's gaze flickered to her, but he saw a stranger, her filters, her followers, her world, a stark contrast to the depth he'd discarded. "It's nothing," he muttered, but the lie was thin, and Kira's laugh was a shard of glass. "Nothing, you're falling apart, Marcus, over your ex. Pathetic." She turned away her phone, reclaiming her attention, but her words lingered, a final crack in the facade he'd built. Marcus leaned back, his eyes closing, the city's hum a distant dirge. He saw Danielle's face, her curls, her glow, the strength he'd never honored. He saw Kai, a boy with her eyes, growing up in a home warmed by Emery's love, a man who'd built an edtech empire. While Marcus peddled software to suits, he saw the life he might have had, a garden where Danielle grew her flowers, a table where they dreamed together, a son who called him father, but he'd walked away. Blinded by Kira's dazzle, and now he stood in the ruins, a man who'd gambled on a dream that glittered but didn't last. Regret was a tide pulling him under. Not for losing Danielle, but for failing to see her, for choosing a path that led to this empty chair. This empty life. Across the city in Havenport's quiet embrace, Danielle Miles tucked Kai into bed, his tiny curls soft against the pillow. His warm brown skin warm under her kiss. Her apartment, modest but alive with love, glowed with the scent of lavender and the hum of a French lullaby. Emery stood in the doorway. His navy blazer shed his smile, a steady anchor. "He's out like a light," he said, his voice low, and Danielle's laugh was soft, a melody of peace. She wore a loose blouse, her curls free, her hand resting on Kai's blanket. A mother, a visionary, a woman reborn. She crossed to Emery, their fingers intertwining their shared dreams, a tapestry of possibility, her global horizons, sending students to the world, his startup transforming lives, their love. A foundation that didn't need to shout. The pain of Marcus's betrayal was a distant scar, a stepping stone to this moment. Danielle had faced the storm, Kira's venom, Marcus's smirk, the weight of motherhood alone, and emerged stronger. Her roots deep in Havenport soil, her branches reaching for the stars. She leaned into Emery, the sea whispering beyond their balcony, and felt the world align, a future bright with promise. Back in the condo, Marcus opened his eyes, the skyline a blur through unshed tears. Kira's reel played on her voice, a faint echo, but he was alone. The city's pulse no longer his. He'd left a queen for a mirage, and now he'd live with the shadow of that choice. A man haunted by the life Danielle had built without him. As the clock ticked past midnight, the stars above Havenport burned bright, illuminating Danielle's rise and Marcus's fall. Two paths diverged, one soaring, one lost forever, as Danielle Miles rises and Marcus Bray falls. Their story leaves us with a powerful truth. Resilience can transform pain into purpose. What did you think of Danielle's journey? Did her strength inspire you, or did Marcus's regret strike a chord drop? Your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Your city might spark our next tale, and huge. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Your support keeps these stories alive, so hit that subscribe button for more. Until next time, keep chasing your own ascent. See you soon.